Hello world, I'm glad that you're here with me for another session in this pdfToolbox 12 launch week about what is in the new PDF-based ISO standards. So a short overview, I'm going to talk about pdfToolbox, a dated revision that is about to come out in this year, maybe, or early 2021. And then, most importantly, about the subset standards, pdfX, which will take the most time in my presentation, pdfVT, and also pdfA. And we will see what relationship pdfA has to pdfE. So first, pdfToolbox. So this is just an overview, a timeline. pdfToolbox will come as a dated revision. We just don't know whether this is going to happen in this year, 2020, or beginning of next year, 2021. And a dated revision means it doesn't have many new features. It's more a cleanup of something that has been there before. So the dated revision of pdfToolbox doesn't introduce lots of new features. And what it introduced, we will look into later on in this presentation. After that, or not after that, most likely within this year, we will see publications of PDF A-4, which will include pdfE for engineering, PDF X-6, and PDF VT3. So these three subsets, standard parts in the terms of ISO, are most likely to be published more or less every day. So they will not be published every day, of course, but they could be, so we're expecting them. The texts are final, so nothing is going to change. Everybody who has access to the text has access to the final text, so it was possible for us at Callas to develop based on these texts. It's just the internal ISO procedures that are going on right now. Slightly different for UA, for universal accessibility. This will take longer, definitely not in this year. We don't know, it may take even 2 more years. And another standard that is not so important in our context is pdfR for raster, which has been developed and is already published. And I have one slide on this standard as well in my presentation. So let's begin with a short overview. We have pdfToolbox, we have the dated revision, which is a gray bubble in the background here. And we have subset standards, and they are subset standards because they limit the feature set that you can use in them. So of course you have to be based on pdfToolbox. So all these new standards are based on this on pdfToolbox dated revision. And then what you also see in this diagram, there are sections where they overlap. And that is the one thing, the first thing that I want to emphasize here. For the first time, these standards have been developed more or less with at least an overlap of people in it. And we made sure that wherever possible, they literally use the same text. So for instance, the font section is exactly the same in PDF A4, in PDF X6, and when it comes out in PDF UA2. So wherever at least that makes sense. And that makes it for us, for me as a developer, it makes it much easier to write something that allows you to convert to more than just one standard at the same time. Yeah, and then there is PDF VT3, which is based on PDF X6. So every PDF VT3 file has to be a valid PDF X6 file. Short recap. So what actually was new in pdfToolbox when it came out in 2017? What was new, which is relevant for us, for the prepress industry? First, there is color. And from my point of view, the really most important feature that was introduced with pdfToolbox, by far most important, is page level output intents. So as you know, in a PDFX file, you have to have an output intent that specifies the printing condition, the color characteristics of the printing process for which the file has been produced, the intended printing conditions. Up until pdfToolbox, up until PDF X-6, it's only possible to have one output intent per PDF file for the whole document. However, if you think of something that has a cover and a body or so two cover pages and a block in the middle, in between, and frequently they are produced differently. So if output intent taken seriously, that wouldn't work in a single file, in a single PDFX file, because you would want to have different output intents for the two parts of the file. You can do that in pdfToolbox or in PDF X-6. So I believe, and we will get to that later on, I think that is one of the, or maybe the most important new feature in these overall series of new standards. And then there is a black point compensation entry. So black point compensation being a parameter of a color conversion. And in up until pdfToolbox, it was always the color conversion engine had to decide whether black point compensation is being used or not. And in starting with pdfToolbox, you can have in a PDF file objects that have a black point compensation entry to on and others that are off, so that it's possible to, on an object basis, to specify whether object should be converted using black point compensation or not. And then, for instance, for company colors, you may want to don't use black point compensation, but for images you definitely want, so you can do that. You can specify that. And then there is just a detail that doesn't have to interest you much, so it's just important for us as a vendor that we support it. There is a different means to specify, for instance, a CMYK color, a device color, and then make it ICC based via the transparency group color space entry. So up until pdfToolbox, the transparency group color space entry had only had an impact when there was transparency. This is not the case in pdfToolbox anymore. But again, this is just an internal thing, important for us as a vendor. The engine just has to support it from a user point of view. A few more things. Another feature that I believe is important is DPart metadata, so page level metadata, again related to pages, again a building block that would allow you to automate and process PDF files differently based on pages. So here we have two building blocks that would allow us in the future to do page-based automation. So DPart metadata that was specified in pdfVT 1 a couple of years ago already, and up until pdfToolbox could only be used in a pdfVT 1 file. It is now specified in pdfToolbox itself and can then be used in PDF X-6 or in pdfVT 3. Another important thing, and why that is important, we will be getting to later on, are annotations and form fields. Up until pdfToolbox, you could have just an indication here is a node, and without saying the PDF, specifying inside of the PDF file how that node should look like when being displayed in the viewer, and then the viewer would use a default appearance for that node. This is no longer possible in pdfToolbox. In pdfToolbox, you have to specify the appearance of the thing. That means each annotation, each form field has to come with its own content stream that defines content that is used to be to be shown on the page to indicate that, that here is an annotation or a form field. And then probably not so important in this context, whenever you have a new version, you know security lives and evolves all the time. Some updates when it comes to encryption and signatures. So that was all pdf2o. That nothing of that is really new. That was all published with pdf2o in 2017. And as you probably also know, it wasn't used that much up until now. Now dated revision. Dated revision just was yet another cleanup. So really from our standpoint as a vendor, this is the best PDF specification that I have ever seen. It's really, I mean, ISO is democratic, so it's procedures are taking long, but they are very thorough, and many thoughts and findings about mismatches in the specification have been clarified here. Massive changes actually in the specification, and from a vendor point of view, a huge step forward. However, I have to say from a user point of view, not much has really changed. It's only really details. The most important thing that I could think of is actually the a new Japanese character that comes in via new CMaps. Character maps, and the Japanese have the habit to develop and publish a new character whenever there is a new emperor. And since there was a new emperor after 2017, we now have in pdf2o new CMaps that have this new character in them. So, but this is, as you may notice, really a side note, and I'm only mentioning it to show you how, that there aren't really new features in there. So, getting closer to what has changed in pdfToolbox 12 and which may have an impact on your production at some point in the future, probably not tomorrow. pdfToolbox 12 already has full validation of these new standard parts and conversion. So you can, since Thursday last week, you can create PDF X-6 or PDF A-4 files with pdfToolbox 12, or you can validate files whether they comply to these subset standards. And then you see that there are also some conformance levels. So there is PDF X6N, PDF X6P, and so forth. And we will be getting to that later in this presentation. Most of the time, I have dedicated to PDF X6 because I believe that is the most important standard for you from the 3 ones that will be coming out. And then this just repeats what I have already said. The most important thing for PDF X6 to notice is it is based on pdf2o and therefore inherits all the features that are specified in pdf2o, which is page level output intents, black point compensation, and the side node or the transparency groups that can inherit their ICC color space to devise the MLK objects in them. And that is how that is being reflected in pdfToolbox. So for every check in pdfToolbox you have now, you can now specify an output intent scope. So you set up a check using properties, and in various cases, in probably most cases, this new setting doesn't have any impact. However, as soon as your check has some relationship to an output intent, you can say, okay, this check should use the output intent from the document level, it should use the output intent from the page, or, which usually makes the most sense, it should be effective. That means if there is an output intent on the page, then that overrides an output intent on the document level. So the effective output intent is that from the page. And if the page doesn't have one, but the document have one, then that is the one that is effective. Yeah, and so you have this new parameter here, and you can also assign a page level output intent or remove it via fix-up. So there are fix-ups in pdfToolbox 12 that allow you to change page level output intents, to remove them or whatever. So you could, for instance, specify a check that identify certain pages. So you could say, give me all color pages, and then assign a certain page level output intent to these color pages. So that is all possible. For the black point compensation entry, you can set it, so you can find objects and specify whether you want to assign this black point compensation entry to these objects or not, or you can remove them. So again, everything is possible here. And for checks and fix-ups, again, as long as this is a pdf2o file, so the previous two things are not related to pdf2o, because for the last item here, inheritance of ICC-based color spaces to CMYK objects, or RGB is the same, that only is the case in pdf2o file, which means if you, it's really a detail here, but that really means if you just modify the header entry in a PDF file from 1.7 to 2.0, for instance, the color might slightly change. So a color that had been device CMYK before could change to be ICC-based CMYK thereafter. But these are just the rules that are defined in pdf2o, so this is not specific to pdfToolbox, to the implementation of pdfToolbox. And then I told you that PDF X-6 is much more closely related to PDF A-4 than PDF X-4 was to PDF A-2. And I'm seeing that there is a question.
Yes, let me interrupt you because we actually have a number of questions, and before you get too far away from the topic. So the first one goes back to the relationship between PDF X6 and PDF 2.0. And the question is the basis for PDF X6 always to PDF 2.0, or can it also be PDF 1.7?
No. Yes. No, yes. So, yes, it is it is always pdf2o. So you can't have a PDF X6 file where in the PDF header you have PDF 1.7. However, you can imagine that the conversion from a PDF 1.7 file to pdf2o file is fairly easy. You just have to change the number in the header. Yeah.
So one more. Which applications can produce PDF 2.0?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Very good question. Not many. So pdfToolbox can. So you can, as I've said, you can convert to PDF X6, and what the engine has to do then is to modify the header of the file to pdf2o. Just as a side note, that wasn't actually as easy as it sounds in the first place, because as you know, we're using the Adobe PDF library, and at least that version that we were using was not prepared for that. So we had to use some tricks, but it's not rocket science, so you can do that. But we are waiting for, I would say, more real PDF creators to support pdf2o. We only have PDF chip, and that is going to change soon. But we all know that there are other products that are more frequently used, last but not least, the Creative Suite. And we only know I only know that Adobe was involved in the procedures and in the creation of these standards very much. So with various people that were in the meetings. So I can just, my personal expectation, and I don't know anything about it, is that this is going to change once PDF X6 is there.
Okay, and then last one. Well, maybe not. On device link profiles. And the question is about a PDF file that has different output intents in it. Well, maybe not device link profiles, output intents. So different pages have different output intents.
Yeah.
And then the question is, what happens if that now needs to be changed? For example, you want to modify the output. You want to repurpose that file for a different output.
Yeah, the procedure, of course, gets more complicated from your point of view or from the point of view of an integrator of an application. You have to decide somehow. I mean, it would be easy to remove all. I mean, you have all the tools, I believe, that you need to do something in pdfToolbox, but you have to decide what you want to do. So assume you have a PDF file. Let's take a simple case. You have, let's say, 2 pages, and on document level you have ISO-coded VT, and on the second page you have web-coded. And now you want to repurpose that for newspaper. Then it would be easy to remove everything that is there, or to do a color conversion, taking the output intents into account that are present on the 2 pages, or whatsoever, or to leave the one in there and just change the document level output intent. So you can basically do whatever you want. However, of course, the decision what to do is more complicated now.
You could, for example, I assume, look at something like DPart to figure out which page belongs to what purpose, and then do something with those pages.
You wouldn't even need DPart, so you can just with pdfToolbox find out which page has what output intent, and then act on that information.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's it for now.
Yeah. Yes, PDF X6 inherits from PDF A4. So we were here, was telling that PDF A4 and PDF X6 are more closely related to each other. And that means some of the provisions that were present in PDF A4, but not in PDF A2, but not in PDF X4, are now taken over because they were just ISO just thought that they make sense. So lots of syntax provisions that make sure that a PDF file is designed according to PDF rules. And one thing that also changes in PDF X6, it's now allowed to have annotations and form fields as print content. So in PDF X4, we as a conversion engine had to move all annotations and form fields out of the trim box, or actually of the bleed box. That is no longer needed anymore. Of course, in your workflow, you can still decide to do so. However, you don't have to do that for PDF X6. So you can have annotations and form fields as print content. And that makes sense because, as I have previously said, they all have an appearance. So they are using PDF content stream information to define how they should be displayed. And for these appearance streams, these content streams, the same rules apply as to any other content stream in a PDF file. So they have to be defined in a device-independent way. They may only use CMYK if there is a CMYK output intent, and so forth. Last slide on PDF X6, conformance levels. So actually we decided to keep what we believe are niche applications of PDF X5 in this case. Niche applications, but applications that are used, and that is PDF X6N, which is a successor of PDF X5N, and PDF X5N was about multi-channel color, so more usually more colors than the 4 process colorants, so more process colors, I should say. For instance, 7 color space, CMYK, OGV, or other color spaces where, and that is only important if you would mix these colors, and then you would want to have an ICC-based an output intent with an ICC profile that uses more than just CMYK or different process colors than CMYK. The other case is PDF X-6P, and that successor of PDF X5P, which allows for referenced ICC profiles in the output intent. So typical use case, newspaper ads, where the ad just has text and then just carry the ISO newspaper ICC profile with this, I don't know, 20K PDF file. Doesn't really make sense. It's so big, the ICC profile doesn't have lots of information. So useful when you're dealing with standard profiles anyway, when receiver and sender know what ICC profiles use, and then you would just use a reference instead of embedding the ICC profile. So far, PDF X6. So keep asking questions if you have to. I think all these questions were really good ones. Standards are, in the first place, theory. I'm telling you that we are closer to seeing that in reality. But yeah, just ask questions if you want to. So now we are at the small blue bubble here, which is just living inside of PDF X6, PDF VT3. PDF VT stands for variable and transactional printing, usually huge PDF files with thousands of pages, invoices, for instance. Many provisions in PDF VT are designed to allow a DFE, a RIP, a processor of the file, to do better caching. So there are rules, metadata associated with objects that allow for specifying whether content on a page is static, means it shows up on more than just one page, or whether it's variable and changes over pages. And that makes the life of a processor easier, because then the caching can rely on that information. And of course, that information is only useful if it's reliable, and therefore validators such as pdfToolbox can and have to double check whether that information is correct. And then there are also rules in which way variable content may interact with static content. And most importantly, there is also page-based metadata DPart. So I've mentioned that. So this is the other part. So the one part is provisions for better performance, and the other part is DPart metadata that is in PDF VT, for instance, used to specify the zip code for an invoice, and then based on that DPart metadata structure, an output device could optimize by zip codes the output, which at least in Germany would allow you to get better tariffs at the mail organization, because then you're able to deliver sorted invoices to them, let's say for Berlin, for Bavaria, and whatsoever. Yeah, and this is more about DPart. So actually I've just explained one use case, so the recipient information, and the other use case is production information. So you could the same way specify whether a page needs to be printed on a color device or just on a one color printing machine. You could have information whether a paper from a certain paper tray has to be used, binding information, folding information, and so forth. This can all go into DPart metadata. And I already told you that was specified in PDF VT1 already and has been taken over to PDF 2.0. One important thing has been changed in between. So the structure is not new. It was specified in PDF VT1, I don't know, at least 10 years ago, I'd say. the one problem was it defines a syntax, so it told you how to specify the metadata hierarchy and where to put the metadata, but it didn't tell you in which way. So the one could say this page color, and the other would say use color. So stupid examples, but there was no semantics defined, no specification what keys used with what values for what purpose. This has changed by yet another standard, the print product metadata standard. No, that side. Okay. We said we shouldn't do that, but I want to try that anyway. So print product metadata, new standard, and that helps us here out of this dilemma. And I still believe this is going to change. So once I believe page-based automation is one of the next things that we will see in prepress automation. And then I'm pretty sure print product metadata will play its role there. What we have seen from support cases actually, and which is already there in reality, that DPart is used for optimized and faster ripping. So that came to me as a surprise. In support, we received an inquiry whether we, with pdfToolbox, could not just read DPart, whether we could also insert it into a PDF file. And again, to me, it was a surprise. What I learned from this case and afterwards also from other cases is that some DFEs are using record information. So they want to know where a new record starts for optimizing the processing of a PDF file. So when you know this is the structure here on every, let's say, 4th page, a new invoice starts, then you know, and then it's easier to identify which parts of the page are static and which ones not. So it becomes important to insert simple DPart structures into a PDF file. And we have worked on that, and that is possible in pdfToolbox 12. Olaf, on the first day in his quick fix presentation, already showed you how that is possible. And that is part of quick fix. So here what we introduced in pdfToolbox 11 is the DPart viewer. Another thing, one thing what I believe is unique, so I don't know any other DPart viewer. We implemented that because we believe this is just one thing that is needed for if you want to start using DPart metadata. And as I've said in yesterday's session, this is freely available. So when you have a pdfToolbox just installed, even without activation, and you have a PDF file with DPart in it, then you can look at it with pdfToolbox 11 already and also with pdfToolbox 12. What is new in 12 and where you actually need a license for is if you want to add DPart metadata. And in the session right after this one, I will demonstrate a predefined process plan that allows you to do so. And this process plan is even smarter than what Olaf has demonstrated. This one uses information from the PDF file in order to identify where records start. So I was looking forward to this slide because I wanted to stand in this nice data center. Yeah, looking nice here, a little dark. So PDF A-4, this is a data center where all the PDF files are archived. As I've said, from my point of view, one important thing with these new subset standards is it's easier to combine them. So it's easier to combine PDF-A with PDF-X, and then you may ask, why would I want to do so? And then my answer would be, okay, it depends on whether you start using PDF-A or whether you start using PDF-X. And just briefly, if you start using PDF-A, you may want to also comply with the stricter color-related requirements in PDF-X, just to make sure that the file can be printed in the future on a professional printing machine. More frequently, you may want to comply with PDF-A at the same time when you come from PDF-X. And that may be the case when, for instance, you generate a page that is going to be printed, that you then want to archive. Maybe you have to provide it to the national archives, and they are at least thankful if you can provide them with PDF-A files. And when you're looking at the text of PDF-A4 and PDF-X6, you see that roughly, not really 50, but almost 50% of the texts are literally identical. And then the other thing that I think is good to know a bit about PDF-A4 compared to PDF-2 is it's easier. It has it removes a few provisions that turned out to be more problematic to achieve than that they would actually bring something. They support more features, and then there is this close relationship. Important, of course, from an archival point of view, there is no need, absolutely no need to convert a PDF-A1 or PDF-A2 file to PDF-A4. It's just, I received these questions, so I want to be clear about that. If you have an archive, well, let's say a PDF-A1 file, there's absolutely no need. You doesn't make anything better by converting that file to PDF-A4. It's just for new files that are entered into the archive, it really makes sense to think about PDF-A4 because it's just, it relieves or it removes conversion needs, and it's always better to keep as much as possible from the original file. These are just provisions that has been removed, extension schemas for XMP, which were really a pain for converters. And some other points here. So for us, as a vendor of PDF-A conversion software, I'd say it's really all the pain point, all the things that could be problematic when it comes to conversion to PDF-A have been addressed here. We also wanted to make it easier, so we removed the conformance levels. So U for Unicode was a smart idea in the beginning. So Unicode for text is needed to be sure that text can be copied out of a PDF file. However, it turned out, I mean, this PDF-A is meant to be a rule for archives. And it turned out that there are so many PDF files that where 99% of the text has Unicode, but 1% hasn't. And from a PDF-A to U standpoint, then that file is not a valid PDF-A to U file. And often these are just bullet points or so. So not really a problem, but the standard as it was designed and as was just not useful because no archive wanted to establish it as a standard. And so we decided to just deprecate it. And A for accessibility was useful in PDF-A, was just useful until PDF-UA come out, which is much more detailed and much more clear in its provision, so it could be easily deprecated as well. On the other hand, we introduce two conformance levels new. There is PDF-A4F, which is just the successor of PDF-A3. PDF-A3 allowing for arbitrary embedded file formats used for in certain environments and known environments. Just adding XML to a PDF file for a certain purpose is possible with PDF-A4F. And the other one is PDF-A4E, which is a successor of PDF-E. PDF-E for engineering was actually never really used in reality. The engineering industry, however, was interested in a PDF-A variant designed for their needs, so we kind of merged PDF-E into PDF-A4. Last standard subset standard that I want to mention with just one slide here is pdfR for raster PDF files. It has already been published in July. It is, yeah, for our industry, I think just good to know that this thing exists. It has been developed mainly by PDF Association and Twain. And Twain is an organization that specifies standard interfaces between scanner, hardware, and workflows. And they, up until pdfR, they were using TIFF. And as we all know, TIFF is not very well specified. It's not an ISO standard. It had been specified a long time ago, but has evolved via implementations over time. And it's not clear. It's not a clear standard anymore. And ask anybody at Adobe, the developer of TIFF in the first place, they will happily agree. So in Twain, for that reason and for the reason that there are so many good free PDF viewers available all over the world, wanted to have a new standard format here based on PDF. pdfR is very much limited, so it really allows for very few things to be used in it, and there is no support for it in pdfToolbox because it's just a very limited scope here that we have. So this is my last slide, my overview slide again. So I hope that you now have a little better understanding of the meaning of these bubbles here. And I wanted to close this overview session with various spotlights on the three standards with just one main claim or thesis that I also started with. I think really the main message to take off is that we have now a standard specified formats that allow us for page-based automation. And namely, the features here are page level output intents and DPart metadata. So they are specified, they can be used in interoperable ways between devices in workflows. And that's my part, stuff that I have prepared so far. I'm briefly looking at David, whether we have any questions.
Yes, so I have two questions. I think they are both basically the same and they come from the same company. So there should be more internal communication between... sorry, Marcus. Sorry, Peter. Not to mention you by name. So I will read Marcus's question, and I think Peter's question is an extension. Can fix-ups use DPart information as page identifier?
Oh, that is actually a good question. I have to admit, I'm not sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Not directly. So what you would have to do is you would have to use Quick Check. Quick Check allows you to export the DPart structure into JSON, so into a JSON structure, and then you could use, I know that you can definitely, you can use that JSON structure in order to derive a page list, and then you can use a page list in a fix-up. I admit that there could be more straightforward ways to do that. The problem here for us is that the DPart structures are not that much well defined. So we're also waiting on real DPart, on real files having DPart metadata, just to see what kind of keys and fields will be there. And then it should be easy also for us to have more convenient implementations of that. But what I have just said is what we can provide right now. Does it make sense, or?
Yep, I think it does.
I'm happy to enter into more detailed discussion, but we by now don't have a property, a check property for DPart. And the reason for that is that it's not, that we need to wait a little bit until this is really in reality, because our engine here, of course, can only come as a second step after that file has been created.
Okay, so I got the justification from Peter that they are in different rooms, which I already knew, of course. But Peter's question, I think it has the same answer. I'll read it just to make sure. Can I use DPart as applied to check in the new JavaScript created fixups? I think that would work in exactly the same fashion.
As I've said, so it's not directly possible via a property, but it is possible via JavaScript.